I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today on this third of a four-part series webinar. Today's focus will be on operationalizing the checklist. And since most of the folks that are currently on here have been on our previous webinars, no need for us to go over those housekeeping rules again today. So with that said, I am going to turn it over to today's presenters to get started.
Well, good morning. This is Rita Cooper, the Western Region Area Behavior Analyst, and then I'll turn it over to my associate, Melantha.
This is Melantha Witherspoon, the Eastern Area Behavior Analyst, and Lucas Evans will be joining us shortly.
So let's identify what those expectations are today. So many of you joined us over the last two sessions, and what we'll be doing today is putting into practice the information that we've had from last time and providing exemplars and non-exemplars for each item. And we all think this is very critical in the process because you need to know what our expectations are. So without further ado, let's begin. So again, we're going to have the opportunity to review those exemplars for items on the checklist and then give you the opportunity to test your understanding by having a challenge question. So what that looks like is we'll give an exemplar, a non-exemplar, an exemplar, and we'll maybe have some dialogue, and then we'll give a challenge question and then ask you to vote whether it is an exemplar or a non-exemplar, and then we'll take a look at the discussion after that. Not every item that we're reviewing today from the checklist will have an exemplar or a non-exemplar challenge. Yes, thank you very much. We got that visual prompt. For those of you who want to have credit for the presentation today and those CEUs, please enter your BCBA ID along with your email address so that we can send the certificate to you. In addition, the expectation is that you respond to each of the challenge questions and that we perhaps hopefully have some dialogue. So we'll give you a couple minutes to kind of do all that, and then we'll begin with item 1.
Good morning. This is Melantha. Item 1 on the checklist states that based on the FBA, functional relations for each target behavior specifically and separately defined with relevant environmental variables. It describes specific conditions for attention or escape, such as when directions or requests are given or interrupted. So just having things spelled out clearly and related back to the function. So our non-exemplar is Joe's elopement behavior is maintained by escape and attention. And so we would consider this not providing the implementers and other support team members with enough information. And we're going to go to the good example. So we're looking for documentation such as Joe gets out of his chair in the living room and walks out of the door and down the street in situations in which staff are presenting non-preferred tasks of doing chores, or ADLs, when preferred video games are being played. For example, requesting Joe to do the dishes after dinner when he's playing Minecraft. Joe's behavior is maintained by escape. This gives implementers a lot of information, and the developer of the behavior support plan can also design interventions and strategies around those specific situations in which Joe is more likely to escape unwanted demands. So here's a challenge question next. We would like to know if this is an exemplar or a non-exemplar, and you will simply type it in the text box. The hypothesized function of Sally's behavior of physical aggression are access to preferred activities and escape from task demands. So is this a good example or an example that needs additional work? Most people who responded that are working hard to get those CU credits have answered correctly, which it is a non-example because it does not identify specific information.
So let's get some discussion going here. What other things might you add that would help clarify and make it a better exemplar, since it is, of course, a non-exemplar? And you can just kind of put that in the chat box if you would. Yes, we can definitely give you that example again. Thank you for asking.
The hypothesized function of Sally's behaviors of physical aggression are access to preferred activities and escape from task demands.
So this is Lucas. I just joined. So when you read this, what are the questions that immediately come to your mind about what you want to know more information about?
Well, I like that comment. What activities does she want to access?
Yep.
What task does she want to do? Excellent.
Yep. What about when does she not want to do tasks? What about when does she want to access preferred activities? Yes. can't read who said that, but yeah, somebody says what specific things are occurring before the behavior. Yep. So what's the context happening before? What's the specific context afterwards? Awesome.
Oh, I like, somebody gave us an example there. Sally engages in physical aggression when a peer has an edible item. Woohoo, we identified something. And when non-preferred food items are placed in front of her. We're getting there. I like this dialogue here to help us understand. We really need those elements that help staff also identify it.
Thank you guys for all your input. We're going to move to item 2. And item 2 on the checklist ensures that interventions align with the functional relationship. The BSP includes ways to address the functional relationship described in the functional behavior assessment. So strategies address establishing operation, contextual factors, antecedent stimuli, contributing and controlling consequences, as well as psychological and medical variables. So our non-exemplar is Joe is asked to do a non-preferred task, and he elopes. So the strategy that would be outlined in a plan may say, offer Joe a token to do a non-preferred task and tell Joe he has 5 minutes to complete the task, and prompt Joe every 5 minutes until the task is complete. And so we're going to move to the exemplar. So the exemplar identifies the function again. Joe's elopement behavior is maintained by escape. The interventions are listed. The motivating operation when Joe is when asking Joe to do a non-preferred task, we give Joe a choice of when to do it. And then consequences allow him to negotiate when he would like to do it or not. If he negotiates time to do it, or doesn't negotiate time to do it, we just say, cool, I won't bother you anymore. And when he completes the task later, we give him access to preferred activities, such as I think things that will be listed in the survey of reinforcers. So the challenge question for item 2, when Sam is at day program and staff indicate that it is time to go, Sam flips over the chair and the staff then sit with him until he is calm, which is about 15 minutes. So the intervention is 15 minutes before it's time for him to go home. Staff asks him what are the things he enjoyed and when he was at day program. So would you consider this a non-exemplar or an exemplar, and give us some feedback as to why you are indicating it's an exemplar or a non-exemplar. So there has been a lot of discussion around the context, whether or not the function is listed in the context. What is key is by reviewing the context, are you able to identify what the function of the behavior is? And based on the information and the intervention that's outlined in this example and this challenge question, it's attention. So that is why the intervention allows for the staff to have some discussion with him 15 minutes prior to him leaving as a method to prevent him from seeking attention in a unsafe way.
So I think the key thing is, even though
You'll need to turn the mic up.
Oh, so sorry. Sorry, I want to make sure everybody can hear. So I think the key thing here is that even though the words function don't appear in the context, it's still there. And the key thing for the intervention, even though it doesn't say antecedent intervention and consequence intervention, that those elements are still kind of there. So maybe there's not a consequence intervention, but there's definitely an antecedent intervention. And so one of the things that we're trying to help people recognize is that behavior support plans need to be a usable document, and so it's much more valuable or useful to be able to see a statement of why somebody does something that actually gives you enough information to know what you're supposed to do, rather than shorthand and say something like is attention maintained or whatever. So when you read the context, and same as at the day program, staff indicates time to go, he flips chairs, and then they sit and talk with him for about 15 minutes. Well, to me, I can see that in my head, and I have a pretty good idea of why Sam's doing what he's doing. I may not be 100%, but I know something that I can intervene on. And even though it doesn't say Sam's chair flipping is maintained by attention, that's fine. It doesn't, in fact, I don't think that actually adds anything. I think it's just extra words. I think what is most important is that short sentence that says, this, when this situation occurs, 15 minutes before he leaves, he does this behavior, and this is what staff do. So that's a good enough statement that I could make an intervention, which is, hey, I'm going to give him some attention 15 minutes before he leaves and see if that reduces chair flipping. And if I succeed, awesome. I've pegged it. I've got an antecedent intervention that is very effective and problem solved.
I think we also need to remember that, you know, in the behavior support plan, we need to definitely, like Lucas said, shorthand that. Here's what happens, here's what I need to do. It's plain, simple, and clear for staff, because staff are the ones who are implementing it, not us as behavior analysts.
Next one, please.
Okay, so item 3 is target behaviors, both desirable and undesirable, clearly defined in observable and measurable terms and specifically related to the individual. And, you know, as we remember, the task list identifies that as measurable and observable. Dimension is behavioral. So those are the elements we're going to look at in those exemplars and non-exemplars. So let's move on. So the non-exemplar. Joe walks out the front door with a frown on his face. Okay. Joe will tell staff, the negotiators, Joe will tell staff how and when he wants to complete an unwanted task. Hopefully you can see what elements are missing. So let's go to that exemplar now. So, a little more clearly stated, Joe will leave his home, walking or running, without consent. An instant begins when he has exited the property and ends once he has returned home, of course. He can return many places. This happens approximately twice a week. It often results in staff running behind him, losing sight of him, and the police being called. So that's that undesirable side. So we're going to negotiate. It also mentions the desirable behavior assumed. We're going to negotiate with Joe that Joe will discuss unwanted tasks or events with one or more people until an agreement is met about how and when the task will be completed or the event will occur. So, we need to take a look that both elements have got to be there. It's pairing that undesirable and a desirable behavior, and then identifying how we want the behavior to change.
So key things to look at, and Heike, if you could go back one more to the non-exemplars. So we have elopement and negotiate, the same behaviors, but some specific problems with this non-example is that, can you think of any circumstance where Joe might walk out the front door with a frown on his face that you wouldn't consider that to be elopement? I can. And so that definition is not tight enough. So many things fit into that. He could be going to the doctor with staff, and this would be a desirable thing, but he doesn't want to go, so he's frowning. Should staff count that as elopement, as a behavior? And would we want to reduce that? Probably not. Now, negotiate. Negotiate, if you think about kind of the common understanding of what negotiate means, it means two people actively participating to come up with a compromise. And this definition does not accomplish that, because when I read it, it sounds like he's going to demand how he wants to do stuff, and there's no resolution. And so negotiate, we're assuming, is a positive thing that we want to increase, that he's discussing it with staff on and coming up with a compromise on how they're going to accomplish something. This could be something you might count when he's just being demanding, like, well, I'm going to tell you where to put this staff, and I'm never going to do it, and I'll do it when hell freezes over. Was that a negotiate? Well, based on this definition, it definitely is. But that's not what we want. So, Heike, if you go to the next one. So these are longer, but are more specific. They give us an idea of specifically what sort of thing that Joe's doing that we would want to count. And so I think this is more helpful for staff to look at and for us to think about in terms of what sort of behavior we actually want to affect.
And I think the other aspect is, as mentioned, in the elopement understanding, without consent. And then what does it actually, how do we measure it? So we measure it by duration, and that's when he's exited the property and when he returns home. And how frequently does it happen? Staff might want to know that. What's the outcome? I see this in many times in event reports. Staff run behind him. It's like, oh, let's play chase, and then lose sight of him, and then we call the cops. That ends well. Probably not. And then the negotiating side is that, as Lucas mentioned, it's not this, Joe says this is going to happen and this is the way I want it. No, there is an agreement met on specifically how and when the task is completed or the event will occur. And I think those are really those keys in what we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. So no challenge on this one. Am I forward?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So item 4. So now we're talking about, does the plan have goals and objectives for skills that the person's going to learn related to the reasons why there are services or the problem situations. So a non-example of that would be Sherman will learn appropriate coping skills to de-escalate his behavior. Okay, so lots of problems with this one. What is an appropriate coping skill? And in what situations should he learn them? De-escalate his behavior. What behavior? All behavior? So I've heard that dying is a good way to de-escalate behavior. So is that one of the goals, that we want Sherman to die? Like, probably not.
And that constitutes, of course, the dead man test.
That is true, yes. Okay, so next one is an example. So we want Sally to utilize her anger plan during at least 75%. So 3 out of 4 times when a situation comes up that in the past she would have gotten aggressive, we want her to use her anger plan. And that looks like saying, hey, I need a break, going to a safe place, doing some deep breathing, and then when she's calm, as represented by even, controlled, lower rate of breath, returning to the original area. And so this is a clear goal of multiple steps that we want her to be able to do, at which point probably she's going to be much more successful at kind of dealing with an angry situation. So if I think about how I act in a situation that makes me angry, I might move away, say, hey, I got to get out of here for a second, or I need a break, get myself kind of under control with some deep breathing. But it's really important that I also go back to where I come from. So we wouldn't want the goal to be her just running away every time something's hard. We want her to remove herself long enough to get calm and then go back to the situation so that she can be successful.
And I love this example, Lucas, also because it spells things out clearly. People can definitely identify what needs to be measured and take good data on it.
And I also think that, there might be the ability for staff to have some flexibility. Maybe she doesn't say, I need a break, but as Lucas said, I need to get out of here for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just go to my quiet place? Hopefully we've supported staff well enough in the training of the behavior support plan and these elements that they can allow for that flexibility and interpretation of what we expect.
The last thing to mention on this one too is this overall goal kind of to me looks like something that you want to achieve by the end of services, but there's definitely opportunity within this description to have multiple sub-goals, so you could actually show progress towards meeting this goal and stepwise. So getting her to say I need a break 3 out of 4 times is a good start, even if she doesn't leave and she gets physically aggressive. Like, that would still be movement towards the goal. Saying I need a break, leaving and never coming back would also be movement towards that goal, even though it's not exactly where you want it to be. So by writing something like this, you actually have multiple kind of sub-goals towards the larger goal that you can show progress on over time, which is going to be really, really important for your documentation, justifying that person's actually making progress.
The other aspect that you have here is that staff can then intervene. So if Sally says, I need a break, but doesn't move, then, oh my gosh, staff could prompt her. Hey, your safe place is fill in the blank, whatever it is, and then maybe she does move. So I think having the ability, sort of this task analysis of what we're going to expect from her is really important to help staff be successful. And then as we train and develop things, as Lucas said, we have the ability to measure movement towards the ultimate goal.
Okay, item 5, a description of the data collection to assess the effectiveness of the plan, measurement of target behaviors, fidelity of implementation, and we are looking for this to be included with the behavior support plan. So, a non-exemplar, staff will note all unsafe events for Max, Tim, and Jose in the daily notes. So, there are lots of issues with this. First, documenting things in the daily notes is not a effective data collection procedure. It doesn't allow for all vested parties to assess the effectiveness of the plan. It makes it challenging to create a visual analysis of behaviors marked for increase and decrease. And so we're going to move to the exemplar. So the exemplar, each instance of physical aggression for Jeanette will be recorded with a circle on the daily scatter plot data sheet at the time and location it occurred. If none occurred, then a line will be made through the time period. This does a good job of identifying how and when data should be recorded. It also makes it easier to transition the data into a visual analysis of the target behaviors, and it also tells staff what to do when the behaviors do not occur.
So I love this one. So if you think about the non-exemplar where people are just writing it in the notes, that obviously has the least amount of response effort for staff to do that. But if you think about it from a data collection standpoint, let's just assume that a shift is 8 hours, and so you're getting a note every 8 hours. which may or may not be true, but let's just say for the purposes of this example it is. So really what you're getting is a partial interval of 8 hours. So how useful is knowing that something did or didn't occur in an 8-hour period? Well, if it typically only ever occurs once a day, might be useful. If it ever occurs more than once a day, it's probably not useful because it's not sensitive to the amount of times the person's engaging in the behavior. Now the scatter plot, I'm a huge fan of, by the way, is fairly elegant in that it strikes a balance between giving a lot of good information that you can use in lots of different ways and also being fairly low response effort. So it definitely requires staff to be filling stuff out every hour, but not much. We're talking about making a circle or a line every hour. So if you work an 8-hour shift, you either have to make some combination of circles and lines. If it happens one time in an hour, that's one circle. Multiple times, multiple circles, whatever. But it's very low response effort. You're getting good data, and from that you can figure out some hot spots. So you can look at, oh gosh, it always happens around this time of day in this location. I should probably look into that. You could aggregate it to find out how many times did it happen the whole day. You can aggregate it to see how many times did it happen by location. So there's lots of different opportunities to analyze the data from some sort of data collection system like this. And if you are judicious with what data you want to be tracked, you can reduce the effort even longer. So this would be fairly cumbersome if you're trying to track 20 behaviors, even probably 5 or 6 behaviors. But if you're only tracking a few behaviors, this wouldn't be too hard for staff to be able to do, provided there's a adequate system of implementation and feedback in there, and it gives you good information.
The other thing is that our non-exemplar were for 3 people. My goodness, how do we expect staff to be able to do that consistently? Our expectation for item number 5 is also that when you submit your plan for review by the Behavior Support Review Committee, that you include a copy of the data collection tool so that, we know what that scatter plot looks like. Also, it helps to make sure that the data collection process that you're requesting of staff actually matches what your definition is. I've had situations where, just for ISPs, we've looked at goals, and it's like, wait a minute, that's not how you measure that. So it really helps us give you feedback and effective information when we're looking at this for the Behavior Support Review Committee. So I have item number 6. I love item number 6. We all love graphs. They're really cool. But, the expectation is that data is graphed with the environmental variables, the relevant target information, the strategies. So what we're looking at, of course, in conjunction with the task list is that you measure, that you graph, and oh my gosh, the dimension, analytical, that's what we are. Behavior analyst. So let's take a look at the non-example. My question to all of you out there is, so can you tell what's happening? Lots of stuff going on this graph. The other concern as non-exemplars, that's data for a month on each of those sections. So we're looking at data that is aimed at 1 month period. We probably have no idea what's going on. And then we've got a bunch of things going on, frequency, duration, we've got some trend lines. The unfortunate thing is we don't have any phase lines. We don't have a real understanding of what in fact is going on. So let's go ahead.
We also have to be mindful that the graph is just not for the behavior analyst. The entire team should be able to look at the graph and interpret if there is progress being made or if there is lack of progress.
And I think the other thing, Melantha, good point, is that everyone should be able to understand the graph, and that everyone, oh my gosh, might include the individual. What a unique concept.
And then if I could say, sorry, I'm just going to say one more thing. I want to give a pro tip out there on the use of trend lines. So trend lines are good. They give us an idea of which way the data tends to move. If you're using Excel and you're using the trendline function, this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but it's important because I see it all the time. And a lot of times people have the same column with the behavior data that they're trying to graph, and they don't separate it in that column for what part of the intervention they're in. So what I mean is that when they graph it, they're manually going in and changing some sort of setting on the graph itself to say this, and putting in phase change lines with like just drawing a line to say this is when the intervention started, this is when the intervention was changed, on and on and on. So that's fine, you can do that, but when you select the data and tell it to plot a trend line, what you're getting is the trend for the entire data set as a whole, which is probably not what you want, because that's going to be confused by having baseline and intervention and any changes included in the same set. And so I'm not going to go into today on how to have trend lines computed by intervention, and if people are interested in that, we can certainly come up with some help on that. But be thinking about if you're basing your analysis on Excel's trendline function, really look carefully at how you're arranging your data, because you may not be getting an accurate trend on how things are moving. And you should be able to see that fairly easily by looking at what the recent data is. So if it looks like things are starting to increase significantly up, but you have a really anemic trend line, it's probably because you're including data from way back when that really isn't relevant to your current trend. Or if things are moving, if problem behavior is moving up pretty sharply, but overall you're seeing a decreasing trend because you're looking at the whole data set, well, yeah, if you're looking at current levels of problem behavior, it may be less than what it was in baseline, but it's still going up relative to when the intervention started, and so a decreasing trend is not accurate. You actually have an increasing trend for what the data looks like right now. So that was probably way in the weeds. If people want to know more about trend lines, ask and we can offer some help.
And, you know, that's a great point, Lucas, because that may be a training we'd want to do as a WebEx to help people graph a little more consistently and have the graphs really represent what we want them to. So with that said, let's look at the exemplar. And of course, you know, there are many things that, you know, an exemplar could have, and let's take a look at this. So we've got, I'll throw it out to you guys too, but I'm going to kind of go through it as we see why this is an exemplar. And the first thing I'm going to say is that, oh my gosh, the axis is labeled, which is really cool. Number of days with target behaviors, months, awesome. Then we've got on here both the replacement behavior and the target behavior. So, you know, hopefully you can differentiate that. We've got the target behaviors as self-injurious, aggression, public exposure, property disturbance, elopement or attempts. And, you know, we can make the leap that all of these are being addressed by the use of coping skills. So we've got them also color-coded, which helps us to understand. And then we've got some indicators of some different phases of the program. So we've got baseline there, that's pre-tools instruction. Then we've got that staff was trained in tools. And then we've got some notes, because unfortunately sometimes we don't want the graph to get too messy. So we've got some things going. And we had a comment there. I thought the color graphs are to be avoided because sometimes documents get printed in black and white. It does look pretty. That's great, and I understand that, and it's true. You know, the normal expectation is that you know, for APA and for ABA is that we do it in black and white. And also because of that color issue. But I think, you know, and I agree with that, but sometimes black and white doesn't give us everything we need sometimes. So I appreciate that, you know, we've got them in color. Somebody commented, would it be better to graph each behavior individually? with the coping skill. Might be, but I think you might have some redundancy and people might be a little confused. Also like that comment of use symbols other than circles. Great idea. This is an okay exemplar. Can it be better? Surely can. But I think it gives us a starting point on where we want it to go.
What's great about this, if we think about the process when we are reviewing plans and behavior support review committee, when there is no baseline, when things are not labeled appropriately, like interventions aren't listed, it leads committee members to have to ask additional questions. And so this graph does a good job of having enough information where it won't put, it allows for the best use of time, and it minimizes not having enough information. So.
And it also identifies target behaviors over time for the client in the day program. So, we don't know the specifics of the behavior support plan, but it gives us the opportunity to say, this is what the day program, what's going on at the day program. We might have another graph for what's going on at home, and then we might also have another graph that looks at just the community integration process outside of those two situations. So you all brought up some great points of ways to improve this graph. Love it. So with that, let's move on to that challenge question. And we want you to identify, is this an exemplar or a non-exemplar? Should be pretty easy. And remember, you need to respond in order to get CEUs. Also, I'd like some consideration of what else might be included, or what do you want it to look like? And I just gave away what it is. All right, so as some of you may have noticed, we had a technical issue. We appreciate your patience in regards to that. Technology is what it is. It looks like we've got appropriate responses. We've got that they are non-exemplars. Lots of things are missing. We're missing phase change lines. We're missing identification of the axes. Is that frequency? of aggression? You know, is it duration of aggression? Don't know. So I think those are really important. You know, things you might list on there are staff changes, medication, roommate, school, work, holidays, hospital. Lots of things can go in as phase change lines. And if we're looking at physical aggression, we might want to include what that replacement behavior is so that we can see what in fact is happening.
That's great information, Rita. I just want to make sure that if you decide to join the committee or you are working on your own individual graphs, that you are referring back to the checklist item and just ensuring that all of those elements are present in the graph. So the exemplar that was identified, it wasn't the most perfect graph, but it definitely had all of the required elements. And so when people come to the Regional Behavior Support Review Committee, we are a support to the contracted behavior analysts as well as the team. So we want to make sure we're identifying that those folks met all of the necessary elements and not necessarily focusing on minor things.
So the key is that you should be able to tell kind of how things are progressing or what's going on, and it should lead you to ask questions. And so I think that graph accomplishes that. It meets the checklist elements. Is it the most aesthetically pleasing? Does it meet APA requirements? No. Could we improve upon it or make it more clear? Probably, but I think it definitely conveys the information that it needs to convey, and it leads us to ask good questions about how things are going.
And Heike, if you could go back to the exemplar. I just want to, our goal as behavior analysts is to analyze the data. And what we can clearly see, even with or without trend lines, is that those coping skills are increasing while which is the desirable behavior, and while the target and undesirable behaviors are decreasing. We met the requirement. So, and the individual could also figure that out. Look, I'm doing better. Look at that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it also highlights what support was given to the individual, which is teaching the coping skills, and what support was given to the staff, which was the additional training. So this has a lot of great information.
Yeah, so just to call a couple of those out. So if you look at that first arrow, it says most staff completed tools training. So that means that at that point, it looks like about July 2017, all staff were tools trained, and you start seeing the coping skills go up, problematic behavior staying relatively low. And then if you look at the last arrow that points down, and so you still see coping skills kind of are increasing, most problematic behavior stays relatively low, but you're seeing aggression tick up. Well, look at what that says. January 2018, new policy at day program to send people home for safety reasons, and new documentation style, more thorough. So could be you're getting better documentation. Could be that the day program now has a more hardline approach, and depending on what the function is, which you would see in the rest of the behavior support plan, that might be kind of precipitating or explaining why you're seeing an increase in aggression. Now, you did notice it's starting to come back down, so only additional data will tell on what happens. It may just be a blip. All right. We beat that one to death. Let's go to the next one, please. 7A, implementation plan specifically described for proactive strategies to prevent challenging behaviors, improve quality of life, and promote desirable behaviors. So let's look at something that does not meet that. Each day, Joe is warned that if he elopes, he will not earn his reinforcer, and he's required to check in with staff every 15 minutes when he's at home in his room alone. So does this seem very proactive?
Well, Lucas, for me, I might be a little coercive, but I'm not Joe.
Yeah, so threatening and also making his life miserable with having to check in every 15 minutes is probably not a very proactive strategy. Also, probably not likely to be very preventative. I don't know what Joe's problem is, but it's probably not going to be helped by a coercive and labor-intensive approach. So let's look at something that would be an example. So if we're talking about a situation where there's definitely an attention maintenance component, we could say something like, hey, if staff recognize that they have to attend to something other than the people that are in the house, or they've got to attend to one person to the exclusion of others, tell me if that describes a situation you may have worked in, where there are multiple people in the house and they all want all the attention. So in those situations, you first check on each person to see how they're doing. You provide a brief positive interaction with each one of the people, and you set expectations with each of the people on how they're going to be occupied in a safe manner for a brief time. So you're saying, hey, if you can blah, 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 be safe and while I have to go attend to Joey over here, then when I come back, which is the last part, as soon as possible, return to each person, praise their appropriate behavior, and have another brief interaction about what each one is doing. Was there any questions about that one? Does that make sense on how that is preventative and proactive? Okay, so let's go to 7B. So if you remember 7 is 2, 7A and 7B. So now we've talked about proactive, preventative. Now we're talking about what are you going to teach the person. So let's look at something that's not that. Joe will be taught to go to staff and ask for help when he has a problem, and he'll be taught to carry his address and phone number of the home on him at all times. Okay, so asking for help when you need help is a good thing, but will be taught to go to staff to ask for help every time he has a problem is a little too broad, and also maybe not a great skill. So if you're trying to think about overall wanting somebody to be as independent and assertive as possible, teaching somebody to be dependent as possible is probably not the best skill to be teaching. Recognizing when you need help and asking is awesome, but how are you going to, and what specific situations would be reasonable for that, and what things can he do on his own? And then the last one is about carrying your address and phone number on you at all times. Also, it may not be a bad idea to just have some contact information, but I'm not really sure how that's an effective skill that improves Joe's quality of life. And I would struggle to think of a situation in which that would address a problem situation. Did you have something to say, Rita?
Well, I just think that, there are many elements there that, how do we identify a problem? What's a problem for Joe may not be interpreted as a problem for staff. And, I have visions of ugliness dancing in my head when Joe comes to staff with this, what they consider, a non-problem, and then they get coercive. Why are you asking me, Joe? Stop asking me. Stop, and so it's really puts Joe and staff at a disadvantage.
Okay. Next slide, please. So here would be an example for a situation where the problem seems to be maintained by escape from something. So Joe, his housemates, and staff will determine all of the chores that must be done in the home, and the housemates will make up, so Joe and housemate together will make up a schedule and select chores that they each will complete. Joe and staff develop a negotiation script, so Joe working with his staff, and practicing it using behavioral skills training for situations in which Joe does not want to do the chore he selected or when he needs help to do the chore. And then Joe and staff practice daily until Joe can use the negotiation script skill correctly with a small cue from staff. So just a small little reminder, pulling on their ear to let him know, and you can't see me, but I'm pulling on my ear. I forget that you guys can't see me, when he needs to use the skill. So this would be the skill that we're working on. So it's actually multiple skills. Getting together and problem solving and coming up with everything, division of labor, negotiating when you don't want to do something, and then becoming fluent and being able to negotiate when you don't want to do something or you need help. So this would be an example of teaching skills related to a challenging situation.
I think the other thing that, this allows us is, as in some of the other exemplars that we did, was, the opportunity to do parts of it at a time, working on with Joe and his housemate as to how they set up the schedule, who completes it. Maybe that's a step towards it. And then we work up to the negotiation script. And then we work up to the actually negotiating when there's a task that Joe doesn't want to do. It also gives that opportunity for Joe to maintain his dignity in front of his roommates, because, staff aren't prompting him, use your cue, or you need to be doing this. Who wants to be reminded, use your coping skills, or whatever that thing happens to be. So I think this is a really great approach. And again, we look at, the steps to making it successful.
Thank you, Heike.
Item 8, strategies and specific instructions for reinforcement of desirable target behaviors are described and potential reinforcing stimuli are identified. So our non-exemplar, when Joe asks to do a chore, when Joe asks to not do a chore, we praise him. I'm going to get some feedback from you guys. Can you guys tell me what are some of the issues with this? You guys gave some great responses, but let's focus on some of the things that we have been trying to teach Joe. So this is the opportunity for Joe to use his negotiation skills. And if we think about it in our everyday lives, there are some tasks that, we must do. If we don't clean our homes and we have small children, our homes can become infested with unwanted insects and animals. So, again, this just gives an opportunity for Joe to do some planning and some negotiating and work on those skills. Yeah, someone wrote, which I definitely agree, appropriate refusal is important, but there needs to be clear parameters.
Absolutely. So It's saying no. So one person said or responded that it would be this example reinforces bad behavior, and I think it might get us in a challenging situation, but I would hesitate to ever look at a situation where where honoring somebody's request to say no would be reinforcing bad behavior. So there are certainly circumstances where saying no is not a thing that you could accept. So, for example, if somebody's in a burning house and they say, no, I don't want to leave, yeah, I don't care, I'm going to take you out. But specifically for the population that we're supporting and just human beings in general, being able to say, no, I don't want to do something is a really, really important skill. And so it's not, the issue is not necessarily with honoring somebody's request to say no. It's that exactly what was stated, that appropriate refusal is important, but there's got to be parameters around it. So you can't just not take your trash out ever. So how can we teach you to negotiate, to go back to the skill that we've been talking about, how negotiate when you're going to do that? Or at a certain point, yeah, I get it. Like, you don't want to take the trash out, but there's 5 bags in the kitchen. Like, it's got to go somewhere.
And I think the other thing that it really helps us to set is that the acceptance of no is okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many plans I've read, Joe doesn't accept no well. Well, that's because we always make Joe do things, and we don't give him the opportunity to say, you know, let me finish my whatever and I'll take the trash out. And accepting no in different situations is important.
Moving to the exemplar, a preference assessment indicates Joe likes Minecraft soda. Staff playing Uno with him. When Joe does the dishes, staff says, wow, now let's play Uno. Or they offer him a preferred item that's a part of his preference assessment. I love this because there are lots of preference assessments done, and it's just great to link those reinforcers with the behaviors that we're trying to teach the person or shape, and this really does a good job of outlining how to do that. This section does have a challenge. When Joe has not eloped for an entire week, staff present him with an off-brand, sugar-free soda. So is this an exemplar or a non-exemplar? And give me some feedback as to why you believe it's an exemplar or a non-exemplar. So what kind of schedule of reinforcement is this, and what does it reinforce? I'm going to ask you guys additional questions because you guys are on target with identifying that this is a non-exemplar, and most of you have identified that sugar-free soda may not be potent enough.
Off-brand at that.
Yes. And as well as there's no data to determine how long he needs to go to earn the reinforcer. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to answer the next question. Okay, the question was, what type of schedule of reinforcement is this, and what is it reinforcing?
All right, so Stephen is right on the money. We had so take a break for just a second because we're going to ask a little bit more of a targeted question for everybody. So Stephen got it, and we'll say what he had in a minute. But somebody also indicated that the schedule was a fixed schedule for non-occurrence or for non-elopement. So if you have a fixed schedule for a non-occurrence, what do you call that? So after a fixed period of time, if the behavior hasn't happened, you get the thing. What do you call that?
And we're going to give you a few minutes to answer. Yeah.
So somebody said differential reinforcement, but I'm looking for something much more specific than that. Okay, so, we got one more in our Q&A, I think. Okay, so this is a DRO schedule, so differential reinforcement of other. So basically, Joe can do, as long as Joe doesn't do elopement over the whole week, he gets the thing. So I think there's some different terms for it now, but I would call it a full session DRO. So he has to go the full time period, the entire week, in order to earn the soda. So it's not variable because at least when I look at a calendar, a week's always the same number of days, and it's for the non-occurrence of elopement that you earn the what's assumed to be the reinforcer. So this isn't, even though it's called differential reinforcement of other, it's not really a reinforcement strategy because what is being reinforced is the first question, and I don't know. There's been some research. There's a Jessel article I think was previously cited in one of the talks that part 1 and 2, so it should be in there, where they look at how DROs actually function. And for long periods of time, like this period of time, or really anything over a few minutes, they can function in lots of different ways. So it could actually be reinforcing something. We don't know. We'd have to take data on some other stuff. It could actually be a punishment procedure, and it could be an extinction procedure. We're not really sure. So it's not really a reinforcement. And for checklist item 8, we're talking about specific strategies for reinforcement of a specific behavior. This doesn't meet it because we aren't reinforcing a specific behavior. So we're not actively trying to make a specific behavior go up by just providing a presumed reinforcement on a fixed time period for something not happening. Not happening, again, is something a dead person can do. You can't reinforce dead people.
Well, you could, but probably not beneficial.
They always succeed at a DRO.
Yeah. So that segues into item number 9, because here what we're looking for is specific strategies to generalize and maintain the plan, the effects of the plan, including strategies to fade contrived contingencies. Ooh, wow, I think DRO contrived, to more natural contingencies, and support system changes to maintain these strategies after the BSP is faded. So what we're looking for is, you want to kind of fade yourself out, because the individual should maintain their behavior, staff should help them. There's so many things, and guess what? There's lots more people out there that need behavior services. So we need to go in, do what we need to, and move on.
And then if you look at the service definition for the applied behavior analysis service within the waiver, it specifically says that it's meant to be a time-limited support. It's not meant to be a forever. So behavior services are not meant to be forever in the person's life. It's meant to be a short-term intensive treatment that fades out and the effects maintain.
The dimension we're looking at is generality, and how do we all operate in the natural environment? I always like to use the example of who makes their bed, and is that an important skill you need? But sometimes there are natural contingencies that reinforce somebody to make the bed on a consistent basis. And that's my husband. He says in his natural world, it's a good start to the day if you make the bed. And guess what? I've been told that, oh no, you can't make the bed because I don't like the way you make the bed. So guess who doesn't have to make the bed? Woohoo!
Nice.
Love it. So let's look at that non-exemplar. If after 6 months of no behaviors, the team will meet to consider discontinuing the plan. So this is a non-exemplar. I want you guys to maybe put in that chat box, why? What else might be needed? we're going to roll. Boy, I really love some of the responses back. You know, what specific behaviors, what is the fading plan as we were sitting here and waiting for your responses. Lucas mentioned the fading plan is you fall off a cliff, you know, you don't know what it is. After 6 months, no behaviors. Does the person have to be perfect? Well, if anyone has to be perfect, we've all failed. So we will never, none of us, anyone in this room or on the other end of the line, will never meet this goal. Because guess what? You gotta breathe. So the definition of no behaviors, criteria for goal attainment, discontinuation, information about what the individual has learned. Boy, Donna, that was an awesome kind of summation of many of the elements that you would want to see in an exemplar. So you gave me a great segue, so let's move on to that exemplar. But
we do one more. Sorry. So the other thing that I would say too is that this is not an objective criteria, because it says even so. Let's say behavior is defined in some way. So physical aggression, which has elsewhere been defined, is reduced to 0, and some replacement behavior, which has elsewhere been defined, has increased. It still says that after 6 months of this good progress, they're going to meet to consider, and let's say discontinuing the plan has changed to a graduated fade process. But do you really want to consider it, or do you want it to happen so after you see a certain level of success, the fade plan should just start? It shouldn't be we get together and think about whether it's a good idea, because the decision should be made based on objectively how the person's doing, and you can define that by saying at this point they are at the point where they're doing well enough to start fading this out. And if it doesn't work, the data will tell you that, and you can step back. But having kind of language in there about meeting to consider when situations are met, it makes a lot of wiggle room. And one of the things that is probably going to happen in the discussion is, well, things are going really good right now. Do we really want to mess with that? Why don't we just leave it the way it is? And that puts you in an awkward position about, yeah, it is going really well. However, we can't do this forever. And so having specific objective criteria for when things will be faded is going to be very helpful and facilitate the person actually kind of moving through the fade process and not kind of getting stuck because people can't kind of agree that they want to kind of start discontinuing the plan. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, I think the other element is that, you know, you just don't fall off the cliff and say, oh, you're fixed. Mm-hmm. Well, you know, there has to be fading because, you know, as you pull back, you might find out some things that aren't being maintained. So, you know, just stopping, and that's what I also, you know, I hate to go back to things, but, you know, in many of the due process elements, I don't know how many times we've probably all seen this phrase, meet to consider discontinuing the plan, okay, or discontinuing something, or, you know, you got to be perfect, and then we'll let you be free. But free means a lot. So let's go on to that exemplar now. So when Joe completes his chores and does not elope for 6 months, since he has not previously gone for that long, then we will offer the preferred activities on a variable schedule rather than each time a chore is completed. So, you know, what we're doing is, as Stokes and Baer have mentioned, is that indiscriminable contingency and potentially trying to lead to those naturally maintaining contingencies in the process of, you know, 1, he hasn't gone for that long, and 2, we're going to do it on a variable schedule. So it's not as predictable. You know, we give it to him the first time, then we give it to the third time, and you might actually want to define that for staff because they'll need to know when and what they need to reinforce, and from preferred activities. At least there was some consideration to the plan and that contact of natural contingencies. So those are important elements.
So one thing to also think about in this, would you ever want Joe to be in a situation where he just does his chores and there's no kind of positive consequence for doing that? So like never there would be something good that happens to him after he does his chore? Like, would that be like kind of the terminal spot where you consider everything to be perfect? Or does this really kind of approximate this description of getting things intermittently, good things happen intermittently after you do your chores, of what we would expect somebody who experiences a typical life would receive? What do you all think? Do you think that this is going to be at a spot that's a typical schedule, or does it need to fade down lower, or should he just be doing his chores without any preferred thing happening to him afterwards?
And we'll wait for some feedback on that if we could, please.
So I was sharing with Rita and Lucas that sometimes people will come into contact with natural contingencies when they're able to maintain a clean home. So sometimes they may have a peer come over or a relative and provide them with verbal reinforcement about how clean their home is, which makes that person feel good about themselves and is likely to help them maintain keeping their home clean. Now, I also gave another example is I'm on the road a lot, and I hate to stop and use the public restrooms and the gas stations. But whenever I go to a gas station and it's clean and the restroom has toilet tissue and soap and it's not dirty marks everywhere, I make sure that I go to the clerk and acknowledge how clean that restroom is and how comfortable it made me feel with, actually going in there and using the restroom.
So the key is that, as we should all expect, is behavior goes where reinforcement flows, as somebody says, and I don't know who it was. But so if you want chores to continue, there's got to be something that he gets out of it, and maybe it's something that's just naturally in himself, like there's some satisfaction. I don't know what that means. It's probably related to some social thing. So it's probably going to be people noticing that he did a good job or some good thing happening after. So, you don't. So I guess the thing that I was trying to get people to think about is you wouldn't want to fade this down to a situation where you're not providing any reinforcement ever. What you're trying to approximate is what a typical person would experience when they do those day-to-day things that they normally do. And then the last thing that I would mention. So Rita talked about Stokes and Bayer article. So it's an old article, but it's a classic. Stokes and Bayer, 1977, The Implicit Technology of Generalization, is a fantastic article about all the different ways in which you could try to get to generalization of a skill. And one of the ways in which they talk about it is indiscriminable contingencies, which really just means intermittent. So you're not really 100% sure whether this is going to be the time that the reinforcer is going to occur. It just happens on a variable intermittent schedule. And so that's a really effective way to maintain behavior. So if you can remember way back to graduate training, when you're looking at what the graphs look like for responses under different schedules, variable intermittent schedules produce not the highest levels of responding, but they do produce some consistently relatively high levels of responses, and so they're very effective at trying to get people to generalize and maintain a skill over time without having to invest tons and tons of contrived or set up or arranged reinforcement.
And just to kind of dovetail on that, that's also why people become addicted to gambling, that variable reinforcement. Yep. So let's take a look. We actually do have a challenge on this one. So the challenge is Jane will work with a variety of staff in a variety of environments. And so I want you to make the choice whether that's an exemplar or non-exemplar, and why. What makes it that? All right, so we're ready to roll. You all identified that it was a non-exemplar. Great. Had some good responses. What does the word work mean? What does, there weren't any specifics on temporal. I guess the challenging things for all of us here is that we've operated the Behavior Support Review Committee for almost in excess of 3 years, and we have yet to see, and you know, please take this with a grain of salt, we have yet to see a plan that even considers generalization and maintenance in a specific way, or even identifies that, you know, when we get to this level, we're going to have a fading plan that may look like this. You know, this is often, and often had been, the line for generalization and maintenance. You know, variety of staff and variety of environments. Well, you know, it was funny because we had a young woman who apparently had mastered their ability to monitor their inappropriate social boundaries, but when the support coordinator came over, they were always right next to her. Oh my goodness. So, you know, I think it's a real challenge to take a look at that. And Melantha had some great points that she had mentioned to us, and I think that's really important about how we get to those natural contingencies.
I am hoping that we are doing a good job of coming together as a team and identifying that individual person's needs. There are a lot of reinforcement programs that are good. They have folks earning money for absence of unsafe behavior and displaying desirable behaviors. However, when I consider the bigger picture, money is very reinforcing, and we need to be looking at getting that person employed so that they are generating income themselves.
And I just to kind of dovetail on that, I don't know how many plans I've seen or situations that have questioned the team. So why can't he work? Well, he has behaviors. Okay, we all have had behaviors at some point in time, but we all managed to get a job.
And I'd love to say, let purpose wake a person up. So if a person is linked to a job that they love and they feel like they're contributing, they're going to get to that job, and it's not likely that they're going to be verbally aggressive or physically aggressive because they're passionate about what they're doing and they're happy to be there. People typically don't display unsafe behaviors when they are in a good space, happy and enjoying what they're doing.
Item 10. So the plan has a safety crisis plan or set of reactive interventions if it's necessary, which includes strategies on what to do when risk behaviors that threaten safety occur. So what do we do when dangerous situations arise? So a non-example would be when staff, or not when staff.
Well, maybe staff would. I don't know.
When Sam bites, staff should react appropriately and stay calm. Awesome. This is, what do y'all think about this? So we know, okay, so we know when Sam bites, that's probably a problem. I think we could probably think that. But staff should react appropriately and stay calm. What are some questions that you have when you read that about some more information that you would need to know if you were a staff person and Sam bit you or bit somebody else? Yep, you all had some really, really good thoughts about what you wanted to know. So exactly how should staff react? Yep. What's appropriate mean? Yep. When Sam bites, what? And then stay calm. So like none of this is specific enough to know what I should be doing when Sam bites what. So I don't know specifically what Sam's biting and when I should be concerned about that, and then what I'm supposed to do if I'm a staff person. And the appropriate one is really, really important because there's some significantly contextual information that you'd want to know. So, for example, does Sam have a health issue that would limit the kind of responses that you would do? So, for example, he has brittle bones. Or another, Sam bites people. Sam also has hepatitis C or AIDS or some other communicable disease. What do we do in that case? That's very specific information that we would want to know in order to appropriately respond to a safety situation in which Sam's biting somebody, which should be defined a little bit better. So let's look at an actual example. So during episodes of continuous headbanging, which presumably is elsewhere defined, slide a pillow or a pad between the wall and Phil's head. So Phil's a guy. So whenever he's continuously hitting his head, and headbanging, we're just going to say headbanging was elsewhere defined, slide a pillow or pad between the wall and Phil's head. So this is a specific thing that I would do whenever he's hitting his head continuously being important. So if he hits it one time, you're not going to slide a pillow between his head and the wall. But if he's continuing to do it, you're going to slide a pillow between his head and the wall, or a pad, whatever you have present. So this would be an actual example. Do we have a challenge for this one?
No.
Okay.
This.
Looks like Yep, I agree, Karen. Continuous should be defined a little bit better. So more than once in a 10 or 15 second period, or more than once in a 5-minute period, depending on how likely it is that multiple head strikes to the wall will occur. So for example, if let's say Phil tends to hit his head one time and he's done, fine. Let's say if he hits his head, the likelihood he's going to hit his head again is extremely high, even if it's 5 minutes later, and so maybe continuous would include any maybe we would slide a pillow between his head and the wall after the first strike because it's so likely to happen. Or maybe he doesn't typically do that, and so we're only going to do it whenever he's hitting his head multiple times in a short period of time. So yes, Karen, it's a fantastic point. It should be defined a little bit better to make it a little bit more clear.
Item 11, if a safety crisis plan includes physical restraint or timeout, specific criteria and procedures are identified. I just want to add a note which is on there. Anytime someone has timeout procedures in a behavior support plan, it requires approval. And the approval process is, one, going through the Regional Behavior Support Review Committee. There's actually a tool that is used, and sometimes Dr. Rogers, who is the Chief Behavior Analyst, participates in that meeting, and or the plan is sent to her directly so that she can confirm that all the necessary elements are there, and if the necessary elements are there, then it meets approval.
And we're going to jump to the challenge because we previously defined safety crisis plan and understanding that. So don't think we didn't put stuff in, but we included it previously as to what elements would constitute a safety crisis plan. And this is a challenge to see if it meets, in fact, that requirement of item 11, physical restraint, timeout specific, and procedures are identified. So we'll give you a moment to kind of address this, and we'll be back.
Okay. So most of you identified that this was a fairly good approximation of an example. People did have some more questions about specifics, like what does it mean to remove that person from Johnny's reach? Yeah, that probably could be defined a little bit better, perhaps. I mean, it depends on what is necessary to get the response that you want. So that might be something important if staff don't know how to escort somebody away or suggest. So one specific circumstance where that might be a good idea is if the roommate doesn't, or the housemate, or whoever that person is doesn't want to leave, and so you would want some further instruction about how to address situations where the other person who's been struck doesn't want to leave. So that's a good suggestion. And then somebody else mentioned that there isn't specific procedures or strategies in there for how to actually do the restraint. And we have a little bit of discussion about that while we were on mute, and my thought about it is this. So there are let's restrict ourselves to talking about people in waiver services for this specific example. There are division-approved physical crisis management strategies that are out there, and staff have to be certified and trained in those. And so if the staff are trained and competent, let's say in NCI or MANT, unless you're specifically ruling out specific strategies they shouldn't do, I'm not really sure it adds a lot of value to rehash the step-by-step how to do a restraint that they already know how to do. You're just basically saying, hey, this is the time to consider using that restraint you already know how to do. If there are things to not do, like don't do this hold, then you could indicate that. But to make it as efficient and as concise as possible, I'm not really sure there's value in duplicating step-by-step how to do a restraint if they are already competent and know how to do it. And the other reason why I think that as well is so if you have somebody who's not competent or hasn't been trained or not certified in NCI or MANT, you would not want them to read the safety crisis plan with the behavior support plan and say like, oh, well, I know how to go grab this person now. No, you don't. You need to get trained on NCI or MANT and be certified and be competent in actually doing the restraint. So those are my thoughts about it. I'm happy to hear some feedback about it. And I'm happy to hear input from my co-presenters on if they agree with that or if they have additional thoughts.
I know at least in my region there are people who are employed by different agencies. They have two jobs, so one agency may use NCI and the other agency may use safety care. And so I think it's good to highlight to use the approved crisis management system that the agency has trained the folks on.
And just at least specifying in accordance with the physical intervention method NCI. We didn't want to get that detailed because, again, there are a variety of physical intervention methods, and you would identify the one for the agency. And I think that's important, too, because I've seen safety crisis plans included in behavior support plans that were in conflict with the organization's physical intervention plan because that's what the behavior analyst was aware of. So, that's the other thing. The behavior support plan is a collaborative process so that, we don't get those conflicts.
And then just to hit it one more time, so the behavior analyst is not responsible for teaching people how to restrain them. They're probably not qualified to teach that, or even if they are, that they don't, unless they're a trainer for whatever physical crisis management system it is, and they have that kind of authority or power to certify people in restraints, then they're not doing that. And so just to kind of make it as clear as possible that that this behavior support plan doesn't intend to train staff to restrain people in the way that they should be restrained, that it's saying that at this point in the process, they should use an approved physical crisis response that they should already have been trained and certified in.
Well said.
So somebody said, I'd like to see the names of the recommended restraint holds, not necessarily the step-by-step instructions. So I think that's not a bad thing if you know what kind of restraint system they use and you have some suggestions, like, for example, the double Sunday stroll or the whatever. Yeah, I think that's fine. But again, just to make sure that we're not actually going down into the weeds on staff place their hand between on the midline of the elbow and the wrist and hold blah, 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 whatever. Yeah, I think that's fine.
So, you guys may think, oh my gosh, it's almost 12 o'clock and we're only on item 11. Guess what? We're going to stop at this point in time because the other elements of the checklist will be on part 4. So we want to open a little dialogue in regards to what we've gone through, at least so far. The other thing we want to encourage everyone is that, if you have some really good examples of what the element looks like and you want to share it with us, we would love to include that in future presentations. So, want to get some feedback on what you thought of our exemplars and non-exemplars, kind of if you have some questions or you have some concerns about the things that were presented about the checklist so far.
Okay, so we got some thanks, which we really appreciate that, and some folks have said that it's helpful, so I really appreciate that as well, because if it's not helpful, then we need to make some big changes, because that's the whole point of this. One of the things I think, which Heike, the lovely lady who is facilitating this whole process, pointed out, and really I think hit the nail on the head about the whole reason behind the Regional Behavior Support Review Committee is peer review. So you all had really, really, really good feedback and insight into some of the examples that we shared. And some of the things that you shared, we didn't even pick up on, and we created the examples. Because whenever you're writing stuff on your own, as Heike put it, your brain kind of just fills in the blanks. So you know what you're talking about, or it makes sense to you based on your context or your perspective or frame of reference or your learning history. And when somebody else looks at it, they may not understand it in the way that you intend them to, or they may see things that you didn't see. And so the whole point of helping you all and kind of going through some examples and non-examples, which again are just potential examples, is to kind of facilitate that peer review process. And hopefully we've kind of modeled and kind of walked through what peer review would actually look like. and I hope it's helpful. I hope you all carry that forward and want to participate in peer review. Do we have?
And I just want to add, Lucas, I know that there are lots of supervisors on this webinar, so I encourage you to invite your supervisees to this training. I know it's titled Training for Regional Behavior Support Review Committee, but this is open to anyone who wants to sharpen their skills.
Yep. All right.
So the next session will be next Thursday, same bat time, same bat channel.
Right.
So, and this should be posted very soon, and
registration for next week will come out
be posted this afternoon.
Yeah.
So we look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank you all.